Joshua Ford. They weren't the kind of people who would just take a day off of work and not let anybody know, or to take off for even a day without letting their families know where they are. So when Geney and Josh didn't come back, people started to worry. Geney was always on time, and more often than not, she would show up early for appointments and meetings. She worked as an underwriter with her friend Gloria at an insurance company in Virginia, and she had been working there for 5 years. But Gloria wasn't just one of Geney's best friends, she was also her manager. So it was really concerning to Gloria that Geney had missed a weekly meeting in May of 2002. Geney not only never missed a meeting, but she had never been late, not even once. The last time that Gloria had spoken to Geney was 5 days earlier, when Geney was driving to Ocean City, Maryland, with her boyfriend Joshua Ford. When Geney didn't show up for work and there was no answer at her house, Gloria and a friend of hers drove over to Geney's mother's house just to see if she knew anything, or if she had possibly heard from Geney and Joshua, but she hadn't. So Gloria and Geney's mother started to call around and ask people if they had heard from them, but nobody had. So Gloria contacted her local police department, which is in Fairfax, Virginia, and she filed a missing persons report. Later in the evening on that same day, Gloria gets in contact with an Ocean City Police Department detective, and she speaks with this detective, whose name is Detective Scott Brunel, and she gave him a picture of both Joshua and Geney. So now officially Detective Scott Brunel was on the case. Now, Detective Brunel is an important figure in this case, and I generally don't get too mired down in the names of all the officials that are on the periphery of a case, because I think it can be confusing for people for all these names to be coming at you. But Detective Brunel is certainly important to this case, so you will hear me referring to him quite a bit. So, Detective Brunel went to check out the condo that Joshua and Geney had stayed in Ocean City. When he first got there, he noticed that Geney's car was in the parking lot, and after getting into their condo, he noticed that the room looked as if the people staying there were in the middle of their stay. It did not look like they were getting ready to pack up and leave. Their clothes were unpacked, and their toiletries that belonged to them were still in the bathroom. So to Detective Brunel, he felt like it looked as if they just disappeared. Police began to distribute flyers with Joshua and Geney's pictures, and they began to track their whereabouts. But nothing came of the missing persons report early on, and that's because it's really not that unusual for people who visit Ocean City to extend their vacation another day. But then nearly a week had passed, and then this case began to take a more serious turn. Now, I'll give you guys some more information and get into a bit of background for both Geney and Joshua later on, where I feel it will fit the narrative and give it more of a flow. So for right now, we're going to put a pin in it on Joshua and Geney, and I'm going to talk about a different couple named BJ and Erika Sifrit. Let me start with Erika. So Erika was born Erika Grace. She was an only child, originally from Virginia Beach, Virginia. She was born in 1978, and she came from privilege. Her father owned a very lucrative and very successful construction company that was responsible for building apartment buildings, motels, and condos in what is considered the mid-Atlantic, including a building called the Rainbow Condominiums in Ocean City, Maryland. And Erika's mother, she worked as a nurse. Erika was somebody who was pretty vain. She always tried to look her best. Her outward appearance was something that was very important to her, mostly because on the inside, Erika had some deep-seated lack of self-worth and confidence. Whatever Erika did, whether it was working, basketball, her studies at school, nothing was ever good enough, and she felt that she could do much better. Growing up, Erika was well liked, and her friends saw her as somebody who got everything she wanted. Erika's family lived in a mansion with a golf course and expensive cars and anything else you would think that a wealthy family might have. But even with all this, Erika always felt like the third wheel. Erika was a gifted basketball player, and she felt that her father was pretty intense and pretty authoritative when it came to her basketball potential. But others saw Erika's father, whose name is Mitch, and you'll hear about him quite a bit. People thought of Mitch as a father who coddled his one and only daughter and gave her everything she wanted whenever she wanted it. Erika's parents were a very devoted married couple, and they cherished one another, and that was evident to everybody who knew them. While lots of people who were married for a number of years grow comfortable with one another and maybe not do all those little things that a married couple, a younger married couple, might do, Erika's parents never dimmed that spark. They, I guess, kept that fire alive, so to speak. There was a bond so strong between Erika's parents, Mitch, and Cookie is her mom, that Erika felt that she could never wiggle her way in between them. She felt that her father lived for her mother, and their connection was so strong that Erika could never break it. This was something that bothered Erika tremendously, and as she grew up, that confusion led her into full-blown resentment. Erika's parents indulged in her. They enrolled her in anything she wanted to do. She was in dance, voice, cheerleading, but it was basketball that really stuck. Erika was an amazing athlete. Even though she was very petite, she only weighed 95 pounds. Her coach in her last 2 years of high school, believed that Erika was one of the best three-point shooters in the country, and the only thing that kept her from going to a Division I school was her size. When Erika was a teenager, her family moved to Hollidaysburg, Pennsylvania, where her father built a big brick mansion type home with a swimming pool in the back and an indoor basketball court in the garage. The reason for this was all for Erika. While playing basketball for the high school that she formerly attended, before moving to the new school, Erika felt like she was not getting enough playing time on the basketball court. Instead of fighting with the coaches, which is something her father Mitch often did, he moved his family to a town where he knew Erika could get all the playing time she wanted. And the reason for this is because Mitch decided that he was going to be the coach of Erika's team. And he also hired a private coach, and that was strictly to work one-on-one with Erika to teach her moves that he did teach her, and these moves pretty much blew people away. But this caused a lot of tension with the other parents. They were always mad because Erika would always get the most playing time, and they felt that was pretty unfair. Many nights, Mitch would spend hours rebounding for Erika while she made shot after shot. Erika's parents, they wanted her to go to college on a full basketball scholarship. She definitely had the talent to run any top college basketball program in the country as a point guard, but the one thing she lacked was the height. Now, if you don't know much about basketball, that's okay. The one thing to know that is important is that Erika's position of point guard, they generally run the show. They can be aggressive. They're the ones calling out play numbers and charging at opponents. And Erika, she was not an aggressive person at all. In fact, Erika off the court was shy. Not to her friends, but to strangers. And if there was a boy around, Erika would back away. So, as you can imagine, point guard, a little bit of a, maybe not something you think Erika would be great at, considering she was a little shy, but it worked well for her when she played high school basketball. But once she entered college basketball, Erika found herself, instead of being the best, to now being just an average player. And for being an average player, Erika did not end up getting a full scholarship. What she ended up with was getting into Mary Washington College on only a partial scholarship. And so for somebody like Erika, who lived a pretty materialistic, privileged existence in her youth and early adult life, she was not accustomed to anything short of being the best. During her first 2 years in college, Erika was among the nation's leading three-point shooters. Erika's coach had high expectations for her in the next 2 years, but in the fall of her junior year in 1989, Erika walked into her coach's office and told her that she had decided not to play basketball any longer. There had been no signs, no warning, or any kind of conversation. It was shocking and very unwelcome news for the coach, who had not even bothered to recruit another point guard. But the coach's disappointment was nothing compared with that of Erika's parents. Mitch, her father, was heartbroken, and he maintains to this day that he still doesn't have any clue as to why she quit. The only thing that Erika would say about it, and what she told her coach, is that she was simply burned out from having played basketball since the age of 8. She talked about applying to law school, and she signed on for an internship of a local congressman. She graduated from college cum laude with bachelor's degrees in history and political science. But shortly after this, Erika began a slow descent. Now, skipping ahead just slightly into 2001, one day, a friend of Erika's from high school, who she had been very good friends with but had lost touch with, her name is Kristen. Kristen ran into Erika at a mall called the Altoona Mall in Pennsylvania. Erika was there with her mother, Cookie, and a man who Kristen later learned was Erika's new husband, Benjamin Sifrit, better known as BJ. Erika and BJ had met during the spring of 1999 at a bar in Virginia where they exchanged names and numbers, but it didn't go anywhere. And that's because BJ was really not interested in Erika, because he was focused on his career as a U.S. Navy SEAL. And when he met Erika, she really just did not fit into his plan. However, a few months later in July, they ran into each other again at a different party, and they started to date. 2 weeks later in August, Erika's parents asked her to come join them in Ocean City, where they were going to visit a family member. And Erika agreed that she would go, and she told her parents that she was going to bring a friend with her, and that friend turned out to be BJ. Erika's parents had no idea that she was seeing anybody. Nonetheless, BJ came with her, but he only stayed for a couple of hours, just long enough to eat dinner. And he really didn't have much to say. He was pretty quiet, and Erika's parents, they didn't really think he was right for Erika, but that really didn't bother them too much, because they really did not give it too much thought, because they really did not see BJ becoming any kind of relevant person in Erika's life. They didn't think Erika was all that serious about him anyway. So now, hopping back to the mall, Kristen, when she saw Erika at the mall with her mom and her new dude, Kristen walked up to Erika and her mom, and she asked Erika how she was doing. Kristen noticed that the guy that was with Erika seemed strangely detached, as if he could care less about being introduced. He seemed very standoffish and paid no attention to Erika or the conversation that they were having. In fact, he was so uninvolved that he just walked away. Kristen noticed that Erika did not look well. She was skinnier than normal, and she looked incredibly tired. Ever since leaving college and getting together with BJ, short weeks after being with BJ, Erika became dangerously obsessed with him to the point where she was going out of her mind. Erika was the type of person who, according to what her friends thought, that she would want a big, lavish, over-the-top wedding, especially with her being a daddy's girl, and with her dad having so much money. But instead, Erika ran off to Vegas and had a quickie wedding that took all of 5 minutes to officiate. When Erika and BJ returned after getting married in Vegas, Erika ended up transferring all of her classes to Virginia Beach, Virginia, and moved off campus to where BJ was stationed with the SEALs in North Carolina. Not too long after, the Navy sent BJ to Arkansas until the year 2000. So, what that means, Erika and BJ really hadn't lived together until later when BJ came back. And when BJ did come back, he noticed that Erika was not the same woman he had married. Erika was acting very different, according to BJ. He said that Erika worried about everything, that she had obsessive-compulsive disorders, and a host of anxiety problems that were not there before they got married. And this behavior started to drive BJ crazy. Later, when Erika's friends looked at the guy that Erika had chosen to marry, they didn't understand it. Erika was not into the rough and tough military type of guys. She liked the more, I guess I would say, nerdy guys who fit with her more conservative nature. Friends thought it was a strange choice for Erika, but then again, when Kristen thought back on the day she ran into Erika in the mall, she realized she really didn't know Erika anymore because she hadn't hung out with her in years. So now I'm going to talk about Benjamin Sifrit for a bit. Now, by the time BJ had met Erika, BJ's parents had been married for 28 years. He had grown up in the Midwest, primarily Iowa and Minnesota, and during his sophomore year, due to his father's job, the family moved to Texas. In Texas, BJ did pretty well. He was a pretty motivated kid. He was a competitive swimmer, and he often had several jobs, with some of those jobs being a YMCA swimming instructor. He worked in the grocers, and he was a lifeguard. But one job in particular that BJ really took a shine to was working for a locksmith. This will all come into play, believe me. BJ's parents were very good, hardworking people, and they adored BJ, and they thought of him as a model child, and they had a really good relationship with him. When BJ was 18 years old and in his senior year of high school, he decided that he wanted to join the military. At first, he wanted to join the Marines, but after talking it over with his parents and his recruiter, they came to the conclusion that the Navy would be a better fit for him. After getting very high scores on his recruiting tests, BJ qualified for SEAL training, particular a nuclear engineering program the Navy was offering. Out of the 160 candidates enrolled, he and only 17 other recruits would graduate. BJ was named Honor Man of the class, which meant he was the top performer of the class. Several of BJ's former SEALs, people that were SEALs with him, they reported that BJ could spend all night drinking at a bar, get home at 3 a.m., sleep for 2 hours, show up for drills, and have no trouble running 10 miles. BJ was also known to be a hothead, and he liked to provoke people. Also, he had a swastika tattooed on his chest. That should tell you everything you should know about BJ. In 1997, after BJ graduated SEAL training, he was sent to his first platoon in Norfolk, Virginia, where he kept in close contact with his family. By the end of the year in 1998, BJ had completed medic training, which part of that training required for BJ to conduct between 6 to 12 dissections of cadavers. And though that sounds terrifying, a SEAL will actually become immune after some time to the effects of injury and the brutality of what they are involved in. BJ was told to fix injured soldiers as if they were machines and he was a mechanic. So, BJ had this feeling that, a soldier would never look at it as if his best friend is lying there injured, fighting for his life. A Navy SEAL like himself would look at it more like, I'm a mechanic and I need to fix this, and then they just take emotion out of it and move on. One part of training that BJ took part of included serving on an EMT ambulance squad in New York City, and he also did a stint in an ER at a Manhattan hospital for 1 month, where he witnessed people die and saw people maimed in all kinds of real life-threatening situations. During BJ's first 3 years in the military, he had stellar performance numbers and records. He had a reputation that few others achieve, earning a good conduct medal and expert marksmanship status with a rifle and a .45 caliber pistol. According to his military record, his career was going very, very strong. But then things started to change for him when he met Erika. According to BJ, once he hooked up with Erika, his military life spiraled out of control. Erika was so obsessed with BJ that she would often freak out and act in ways that were really unhealthy. I'll give you an example. One time, BJ was 10 minutes late coming home. He had gone to take a look at some guns with a SEAL friend of his. He was only right down the street from his home. Erika was out, but when she came home and did not see BJ there, she started screaming and freaking out. She was in the middle of making frozen pizzas, and she called BJ over and over and over, screaming at him to come home. And she was taking these pizzas that she was cooking and throwing them onto the floor, pretty pretty much losing her mind. So she called BJ at least 15 times, but it would have been more had BJ not just shut off his phone. BJ felt like he knew that he could not stay married to Erika and be a Navy SEAL at the same time. He knew that he was going to have to choose one or the other. BJ's parents had never met Erika. In fact, they hadn't even heard of her when BJ had called shortly after his wedding to tell them that he had gotten married. It was only 2 months after he ran off to Las Vegas to get married to Erika when BJ started having problems in the SEALs. Now, one of the incidents involving Erika that added to BJ's growing problems with the Navy took place in Alaska. BJ was there for his mountain and Arctic warfare training, and he was not allowed to tell Erika where he was going whenever he went on training maneuvers. None of the SEALs were. It was policy. It was part of the Navy's disciplinary tactic of getting the soldiers ready for what could be the most covert operations in the world. However, in some strange sort of code, which BJ and Erika had worked out before BJ left, he was able to get Erika the exact location of where he was stationed. Erika was going crazy at home. She could not bear being away from BJ, so she flew out to Alaska the very next day, and BJ snuck her into his room. Part of BJ's training involved his corpsman work, which meant that he was trained in field medicines. He often had different kinds of medicine in his room for which he was responsible, including narcotics. Ultimately, BJ got caught with Erika in his room with his medicine bag easily accessible. The military made an extensive report regarding the breach of conduct and gave BJ a second chance. He was told to thoroughly familiarize himself with the Navy's rules and regulations concerning the storage and distribution of medicines, both in the team area and while on training evolutions. After all of that, BJ wanted to get back on track, so he spent some time building up his reputation again. But soon after, things really went downhill with he and the military when he was stationed in North Carolina. By this point, Erika was putting a lot of pressure on BJ to spend more time at home. She had no concept of what a military wife was supposed to do or how to act, even though Erika knew what she was getting herself into when she met BJ. She just could not handle any time apart from him. BJ wanted to make Erika happy, so he and Erika devised a plan to get BJ thrown out of the military so that they could, well, what they wanted to do, they wanted to open a business together. That way Erika and BJ could work side by side all day long. So essentially what they did was devise this plan where BJ would get thrown out. On August 30th, 2000, BJ walked off the base, leaving his appointed place of duty. When he was confronted with the offense during formation by his staff sergeant, BJ told him, "Fuck you." Later on, when he was confronted by his gunnery sergeant, BJ mouthed off to him, and when the sergeant refused to engage and did not respond, BJ told him that he was all talk and no show, and then he went and pushed his body up, like on this sergeant. He was trying to flex, I don't know, his manhood or whatever you call it, and he then walked back to the barracks, packed up his things, and waited for Erika to pick him up outside. But BJ had not been authorized to leave. It was a direct violation of the law. At one point, BJ was thrown into the brig, and when BJ's mother flew out to hire a lawyer to get him out, she got into an argument with Erika, and Erika pulled out a gun on her before BJ's mom locked herself in the bedroom and called 911. Now, after BJ was discharged from the Navy, Mitch, who is Erika's father, paid for a 2-month trip for Erika and BJ to South America. Erika's father had no idea, but Erika had an addiction to Xanax and Valium, and while she and BJ were in South America, they smuggled back just loads full of it. When they came back from the trip, Erika demanded that they move to Altoona in Pennsylvania and open a business together, so as I said earlier, she could be with BJ 24/7. BJ wanted a job outside of the house, but claimed that if he left the house for 8 hours a day, Erika would have panic attacks. He felt the only thing that solved that problem was if they worked together every day. Wanting to make Erika happy, and also for selfish reasons, which was to keep his daughter close, Erika's father bought Erika and BJ their own business. So the business that they had was a one-stop shop for scrapbooking. So yeah, Erika and BJ were now proud owners of a scrapbooking business, and it was located in that same mall, the Altoona Mall, where Kristen, Erika's friend, had run into her before. So they named the store Memory Lane, which was a play on words for Erika's middle name. Erika's middle name was Elaine, so they named the store Memory Lane, spelling Lane as Laine. So as Erika and BJ started living together, they began to learn of each other's little quirks and habits. Living in Altoona was really the first time they had really spent any extended length of time with each other. Of course, reason being because the first few years that they were married, BJ was traveling all over the world, and now they were together all of the time. BJ wanted Erika to get a gun. He said he wanted her to get a versatile gun, like a .357 Magnum. It was easy to load and easy to use. And once Erika got that gun, she had it on her at all times, and she became obsessed about always having it on her. Another thing that Erika obsessed over was jewelry, specifically diamonds. She was also obsessed with the Coach line of handbags, and she had a specific one that held all of her jewelry. Beyond that, Erika loved anything to do with the restaurant Hooters. Her closet was full of Hooters clothing and memorabilia. It was no doubt a fetish. Anything with the Hooters trademark on it, Erika either had it or needed it. And it would be the desire to collect as much Hooters merchandise as she could that would send Erika and BJ to start robbing stores at night. Burglary became their hobby after they had moved to Altoona, so they ran their scrapbooking store during the day, and then they'd go rob stores at night, and what they would end up stealing, they would put on eBay and make money that way. It was a huge high for BJ to break into a store and steal, and according to Erika, it got BJ. Okay guys, this is going to get weird. According to Erika, it got BJ so excited that he got an erection from it and masturbated afterward. Erika also claimed that BJ really didn't even want to have sex with Erika after a while. But if BJ stole, that's what got him off. Now, evidently, after some time, robbing stores and being miscreants of society wasn't quite giving BJ and Erika that sense of excitement any longer. The thrill was deadened, I guess I would say. And so they thought about what they could do to really get that rush again. And then it dawned on them. Erika and BJ decided that they were going to take a 2-week trip to Ocean City, Maryland for the Memorial Day weekend in May of 2002. They were going to drink, take some drugs, and do whatever else it was that had given them that thrill they were both chasing when they were breaking into Hooters restaurants and other stores. Erika had some Xanax and Valium on her. In fact, she had several hundred pills left over that she had bought in South America. Xanax was now Erika's drug of choice, and she was snorting it. Lots of it. And BJ's drug of choice was beer, also in copious amounts. They left for Ocean City at noon, and after heading out of town, they stopped to get some beer before bringing their luggage up to the condominium where they were staying. The building belonged to one of Mitch's friends, and whenever Mitch or Erika and BJ wanted the room, Mitch would just pick up the phone and secure it. Now, once they were inside the room, Erika crushed up some more Xanax and BJ drank some more beer. The condo was quite it was the penthouse, and it was a lot bigger than the other rooms, and some people would say that it was quite beautiful. However, I was able to track down some of the photos of the actual condo itself, and I don't know, maybe in the 80s that was considered beautiful, but I'm going to try to put those pictures up and see what you guys think. So right outside the window of the condo, you could see the Ocean City boardwalk, and of course you could see miles and miles of the coast. A short while after getting to the condo, Erika wanted to go to Hooters. As I said, she collected Hooters clothing and memorabilia, but she had these tank tops that the general public could not buy, and she didn't have one from Ocean City yet, so she wanted to see if they would trade her for some of the ones that she brought with her on this trip. Now, once they got to Hooters, Erika asked one of the waitresses for a suggestion for a good place to hang out that night, and the waitress told them to go to a place called Secrets. Secrets is spelled S-E-A-C-R-E-T-S. So that was the plan. They were going to go to Secrets. Now, the Rainbow, where they were staying, the Rainbow condominiums, offered a shuttle bus for people staying there. And so after leaving Hooters, BJ and Erika drove back to the room and waited for the shuttle to take them to Secrets. This is when Erika and BJ met another couple who were on the bus. They were Geney Crutchley and Joshua Ford. So those are the two, the missing couple that I opened with in the beginning of this video. Joshua and Geney were sitting up front, and they couldn't help but notice when BJ and Erika got on the bus. They had been drinking for quite some time, and Erika, of course, with her Xanax, they were pretty unsteady on their feet and just acting kind of belligerent. BJ did not have the correct change for the bus, and so he asked the people on the bus if anybody had change. That's when Joshua stepped up and just paid for their fare. Acts of kindness came natural to Joshua. According to friends and family of his, Joshua had a really kind and gentle nature about him, and he would lend a helping hand to anybody who needed it. So after paying for their fare, BJ and Erika introduced themselves, and BJ offered to buy them a drink once they got to the club to show their appreciation for helping them out. So now we'll talk about Joshua and Geney. So Joshua and Geney met at a Christmas party in Boston in 1999, but they had lived together since April 2001 in Virginia. Joshua was a mortgage broker, and Geney, as I said earlier, she was an underwriter at an insurance company in Virginia. Joshua originally was from Iowa, and after graduating high school, he went to college in Norfolk, Virginia. Then from there, he moved to Boston, where his family was. He was also in the military for a little bit of a time, but he left with an honorable discharge. Joshua had previously volunteered as a youth counselor at a church in Washington, D.C., where a scholarship was created in his name, and he was also a black belt in karate. Joshua was divorced from his high school sweetheart, and he had a 6-year-old son whom he absolutely adored and doted on, and his ex-wife spoke nothing but good things about him. They still cared about one another, and they were still very good friends. Joshua's whole world revolved around his son, and Joshua had this relationship with his ex that was a really good one. They did not engage in those games that some people can play using their child as a pawn. They both loved their child, and they were best of friends. So Joshua was, I don't want to say the word aloud because I don't think that's the right word, but Joshua could see his son whenever he wanted. Between Joshua and his girlfriend Geney, there was quite an age gap between them, with Joshua being 32 years old and Geney being 51. But the age difference wasn't something that bothered either one of them. In fact, they believed that they got on so well with one another because of the age difference. They were a couple who loved to have fun, and they were very devoted to one another. They did lots of things together, and they also did, mundane things together as well, but they always put a very fun spin on it. So some of the things they did would be, they would plant trees together, they would rake leaves together, take walks, and trying to do some really fun stuff as well. Like, one thing I read that they did was that whenever somebody was trying to take their picture, Geney and Joshua would try to outdo one another on who could make the silliest faces in the photograph. They also loved to pull pranks on one another. I had read about a time when they were both out raking leaves and Joshua had to go into the house for some reason or another just for a minute, and so Geney was raking the leaves. She decided to plop down on the ground and put the leaves on top of her, so essentially when Josh came out, it looked like she wasn't there, but she was actually underneath that pile of leaves. And once Joshua got up close, she popped up out of the leaves and scared holy hell out of Joshua. So they were a very fun couple, and people really enjoyed being around them, and people even found themselves a bit envious of their relationship because it was so wonderful. Now, the move to Virginia for Joshua, away from most of his family in Boston, it wasn't the easiest one emotionally. That's because 1 year prior, a terrible tragedy had struck Joshua's family. Joshua's brother Mark got a call from law enforcement that his 23-year-old daughter Kelly had been missing for 80 days after she had left a rehab center. And after that, the law enforcement called and told Mark that they had found his daughter. She was decapitated and buried in a shallow grave with her heart cut out. Police had no suspects in the murder, but they did suspect that the murder was the work of a serial killer. So Joshua found it a little difficult to move away after that, but his family assured him that they would still be close as ever and that they would visit often, and the plane ride was less than a 2-hour flight. So now once BJ and Erika, we're back to those two, once BJ and Erika and Joshua and Geney, as I said, they all met on the bus. Once they got to the nightclub, there was a long line, and they were told that it was going to be at least 1 hour before they were let in. Well, Erika took advantage of that time to start confiding in Geney about her relationship with BJ. This, despite the fact that they had all just met. Now, with Joshua as a karate instructor, and because he was in the military, he found himself having some things in common with BJ, but on the other hand, Geney really did not have anything in common with Erika. They were as opposite as two people could be. So as they were all standing in line waiting to get into the club, Erika starts telling Geney that BJ had cheated on her not even a year into their marriage, and because he cheated on her, that it caused her to go off the deep end. Erika said it happened when BJ was in Arkansas for SEAL training. Erika said she found emails between BJ and a woman that explicitly detailed the relationship. Erika started following BJ everywhere he went, and she said that she heard him talking on the phone with this woman. Even though it was a one-night stand, it turned into a 6-week internet romance once BJ got back home. Erika said that the woman started calling and emailing Erika, and it sent Erika into a diagnosed serious depression. Erika said that sometimes she could not even get out of bed. That's how bad it was. Now, when Erika confronted BJ, he never admitted it, because according to Erika, BJ had no guilt or remorse. Now, once they were finally let inside the nightclub, Erika was consumed with not wanting to lose her high. She drank a lot and she snorted more Xanax. Erika was being super messy. She was hanging on to people. She also snuck in her gun, which was tucked into her waistband. This despite the fact that there were 4 security guards there with their wands. Erika continues on with telling Geney personal things throughout the night, like the fact that she always carries her Smith & Wesson in her red coach bag. She also tells Geney that she has an addiction to coach bags and that she carries her pills and jewelry in a little coach pouch inside her coach bag. I know, that's a lot. Erika also bragged to Geney and Joshua that she and BJ collected pet snakes and that they have 2 pythons. 2 of them were back at their room. They had named them Bonnie and Clyde, HIV and Hitler, after BJ's idol. They also had cobras and a crocodile. Erika would say that in private, BJ was a racist and that he's a control freak who had become mentally and physically abusive, who felt that, quote, retards, people with cancer, and Jewish people polluted the gene pool. Well, when Geney asked Erika why it was that she and BJ would need guns, Erika told her that it was a gift from BJ, and she explained that when she sat around with BJ's SEAL friends, if they were drinking in some type of a bar, that they all had weapons. She said there would be like 10 pistols laying on the table, and that was just the way it was, and that she got used to it. But not only did Erika have a gun in the club that night, but they also had a 3rd weapon, another gun that never left the console of their Jeep. party out, Erika had spent 20 minutes with Joshua in the bathroom. Now, part of what would become known later to police was that Erika was famous for making dirty promises to the men that she and BJ met at bars, that if they wanted to continue to party after the bar closed. Jeez, this broad is a dirty hamster. Now, while Erika and Joshua were in the bathroom, BJ kept Geney busy. And when they came back, BJ asked Geney and Joshua if they wanted to continue to party back at their condo. They said they would like to. So Joshua mentions that he has some really good marijuana back in his room, and so he wanted to get it, and he also wanted to grab he and Geney's swimsuits because they were planning on going into the hot tub at Erika and BJ's condo. Now, it's important to take into account that the following events that I'm about to tell you is the account that Erika first explains. As this case goes along, you're going to be hearing Erika's account change. It's also important to note that nobody knows exactly what happened this night I'm about to tell you about. However, due to the investigation, there was a conclusion overall of what happened according to Secret Service agents, investigators, and police. So keep that in mind. Now, after the bar closed, all four of them took the shuttle back to Geney and Joshua's condo, and they grabbed their things, and then all four of them, instead of taking the shuttle back to Erika and BJ's condo, they ended up walking along the beach back to Erika and BJ's condo. Now, according to BJ, only Erika, Geney, and Joshua took that shuttle bus back to Geney and Joshua's room. BJ said that he decided that he was going to take the bus back to his room, and that he told them that he would meet them there. But when BJ got back to his room, he realized that he did not have the key to get in because Erika had it. So he said that he sat on the concrete floor for a while until it got too uncomfortable, which at that point he went downstairs and he passed out in the Jeep, which he said was unlocked. Now, before I get into what happened in this condo, I want to maybe paint a picture a little bit of some things about Erika that I feel maybe is important. Now, according to Erika, the reason why she was so overtly sexual and fearless when she and BJ partied was because BJ was paying very little attention to her any longer. She says that BJ was concerned more with putting her down and demeaning her than he was with giving her any kind of compliments. She also says of herself that she is not a shy person, which contradicts how she was in high school. That she will sit down next to people at bars and engage in conversation, asking them how they're doing. And she said that she does this because she doesn't get that kind of attention from BJ, because BJ is not turned on by her and she is not what excites him. It is also Erika's claim that she and BJ hardly ever have sex, further saying that when they were married they did, but then it slowly tapered off to the point that they didn't even ever have sex any longer, just very, 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 very sporadically, to the point where even when they were on this vacation in Ocean City, that they never even were together sexually. After pressing BJ and getting on him about sex, BJ one day tells Erika that sex is not what excites him. So now, BJ, he is the kind of guy who, when he's bored, he likes to make lists. Like, he'll make different lists for different things. But his best list, according to him, is 130 ways to torture someone. If you remember the woman from Arkansas that BJ had the affair with, remember when Erika was in line with Geney and she told her all about this affair that BJ had? Well, the woman that BJ was having this affair with, she wanted to prove to Erika that she did in fact have this affair with BJ, because BJ was denying it. But this woman also wanted Erika to know that she had no idea that BJ was married. So this woman had called Erika and she shared intimate details about BJ that only someone who had slept with him would know. Now what that means, I don't know. Does he hang left? Does he hang right? Does he have a mole? I don't really know. I don't know what that means. But according to Erika, the description was one that she recognized. This woman also told Erika that BJ had a separate mobile phone that was set aside just for her. Now when Erika found all this to be true and BJ was still denying it, BJ sent an email to this woman, and this is what it said. "Hey bitch, you better tell my wife I never fucked you. If you do not call her and tell her it's all a lie, I will drive down to Arkansas and amputate your bastard kids with a butter knife. And then I'll board up your windows and doors and torch your house down." He signed the email, "Your worst enemy, BJ." Now, that email, according to Naval Investigation Report, was the beginning of the end for BJ and his relationship to the military, which there were other things too, which involved cars, foul language, and threats, but we'll get into that later. Well, actually, let's get into it now. One of the episodes which truly solidified BJ getting kicked out of the military was an incident when BJ and Erika had met up with some of BJ's friends who had spent the day drinking at a bar. These friends were afraid of getting pulled over for a DUI because that could cause them to be kicked out of the Navy. So BJ offered to follow them back to the base. BJ was following them, and the car was swerving. Now, BJ sees a police officer, and not wanting his friends to get pulled over, and for the rush, BJ gets into the left lane of a 2-lane 35-mile-per-hour road. What he was doing was trying to make himself noticed so that the police would not pull over his friends, but would instead focus on him. these cars that are coming at them, and the cars were swerving into trees and bushes and even onto the other side of the road. BJ amps up the speed to 125 miles per hour before Erika reaches over and pulls the keys out of the ignition, which causes her to slam her head against the dashboard. Another crazy incident is the time that BJ and Erika bought some cocaine from a woman, and once they got home they realized that it was Ajax after BJ had burnt his nose and choked after doing a line. BJ wanted revenge, so he goes to the cement store and he buys a big 5-gallon bucket of acid in order to see if the acid would melt away the woman's body after he kills her. BJ takes one of their rats that they feed to their snakes and puts the live rat into the acid. The next day, the rat was almost gone. So those are some lovely little snippets of BJ and Erika. So now I'm going to get back to the condo, what happens in the condo. So now this is the first version of what happened. As I go along in this story, it might seem repetitive at some parts, but even though it may seem as so, there are differences. Some parts may start out the same, but then there are these changes in the story that get revealed slowly. So I could either just tell you the end result of what went down, or I could give you the changes. So I feel like I want to give you those changes. Okay, so now it's sometime around 2:30 in the morning. Joshua, Geney, Erika, and BJ walk along the beach up to Erika and BJ's condo. When they first got inside, Erika said that Geney and Joshua were really taken by how nice the place was, and Geney started to look around. She was walking in and out of the different rooms, really just in awe of the place. Erika says that she walked toward the refrigerator to get beers for everyone, and as she did that, BJ, Joshua, and Geney sat down at a table just off of the kitchen, and they broke out the marijuana that Joshua had brought with him, and they all just started smoking before they were going to get into the hot tub. Now, Geney was a little bit modest, and she did not want to change in front of everybody, so she got up looking for a place where she could change into her swimsuit. Erika tells Geney to go change in the master bedroom, which is where the master bedroom has the bathroom with the hot tub in it. And so Geney changes, she comes back down the stairs, and she sits back down with Joshua and BJ. But Erika wasn't really paying much attention to them or sitting with them because she had no interest in smoking, because her thing was snorting Xanax. Erika having OCD meant that no matter where she went or what she was doing, all of her personal belongings were organized. She had a place for everything. Erika always put things in the same place so that she knew exactly where they were. This gave her a sense of power over her OCD. Now, while Geney, Joshua, and BJ were sitting around the table, Erika was looking for her Hooters bag, which she always kept in a certain place inside the condo. Then she noticed her purse was sitting on the other side of the room, where she would have never put it herself. So with Erika having all of that alcohol in her system and all those drugs, she believes that someone had taken her Hooters bag and someone had moved her purse. Without telling anybody, Erika starts looking around the first floor of the condo for her missing Hooters bag and purse. As she's doing this, Joshua, Geney, and BJ were just talking, laughing, drinking beers, just sitting at the table. But by this time, Erika was panicking. She looked in a few obvious places to see if she could find her purse, but she could not find it. So Erika runs upstairs to look there, and when she gets into the bedroom, her purse was sitting on a counter by the bed. But when she looks inside, Erika noticed that her little red Coach bag, this is the one that she carries her valuables in, including a $10,000 canary diamond, a cross, a wallet with all her credit cards, cash, and her pill case, was missing. It was not inside her purse where she had always kept it. By this point, Erika started to flip out. She was running around, looking under pillows and blankets. She was looking inside cabinets. She searched the bathroom and all of the closets, and she started to lose it. That feeling was coming on of not being able to control the situation. She sensed an anxiety attack if she didn't find her Coach handbag with her valuables in it. At that point, Erika decides to call 911 because she says she seriously thought that Joshua and Geney were trying to pull some scam. But not once did she just try to ask Joshua and Geney, or even to bring it up to BJ. She doesn't do it. With the feeling that Joshua and Geney had stolen her things, Erika picks up the phone and dials 911 from the upstairs bedroom. This upstairs bedroom was almost directly above where Joshua, Geney, and BJ were sitting at the table. The place was not big enough to where you could go downstairs and not be heard, so unless Erika whispered, the three of them downstairs would have definitely heard Erika's end of the conversation. According to phone records, the first 911 call Erika made was at 3:01 a.m. When the operator asked her if she needed help, Erika tells her that she does, but she thought she had heard somebody else on the line. So she asks the operator if there's a phone number that she can call the operator back at, and so the operator gives Erika the phone number. Erika was not whispering. In fact, she was speaking quite loud for somebody trying to be quiet. As she was hanging up with 911, Erika thought that she heard somebody coming up the stairs, so she hides. After a minute goes by and she's convinced that nobody was coming up the stairs, she goes back to the phone and calls 911 again. She tells the 911 operator or dispatcher that there was an emergency at her condo. This time around, she sounded quite calm, not panicked in any way like she was in her first call. The emergency dispatcher asks Erika what kind of an emergency she has, and Erika tells her that there are people in her house that she doesn't know, and that her purse is missing, and that she thinks she's about to be robbed. Really, none of that made any kind of sense because Erika had hung out with Geney and Joshua all night, and although she didn't know their entire life history, she did know important details about them, such as their full names, their jobs, and where they lived. So the dispatcher tells Erika she's going to connect her to the police and to stay on the line. But before they could connect her, Erika tells the dispatcher that she's upstairs inside a bedroom where nobody knows where she is. Which was odd because they all knew she had gone upstairs. Erika was then connected to the police, but before she could say anything, the phone went dead, and she sees Joshua walking up the stairs. So, okay, the phone goes dead. She sees Josh coming up the stairs, and now Joshua walks over to Erika, and he's asking her what's wrong and who are you just talking to? And Erika says to him, "My shit is missing. Where's my stuff?" So Joshua asks her, "What are you talking about?" And she tells him that her purse was not where she put it, that it was moved, and all of her valuables are gone, including her Hooters bag. Now, at this point, Joshua backs away from Erika because she was getting really loud. She was screaming and causing a scene, which prompted BJ and Geney to run up the stairs to see what's going on. Erika tells BJ, "My shit is missing," and then she tells BJ that all of their stuff is missing, and then she asks BJ, "Hey, where's your gun? Because maybe that's missing too." Then BJ gets up in Joshua's face, screaming at him, asking where his stuff is. And Erika is screaming over everybody, telling BJ that their money, their cash, and their jewelry was all missing. So BJ tells Erika to give him her gun that was on the headrest of their bed. And according to Erika, she says that she told BJ she didn't think that was necessary. So BJ ended up grabbing the gun himself. And it is at this point that Erika says she knew that BJ was about to kill them. With Erika's gun in his hand, BJ points the barrel at Joshua and Geney and tells them to take off their clothes because he wants to check them for the stolen items. Joshua could not believe what was happening, and he was pleading with BJ to calm down, and he offered to help them look for whatever was missing and told them that he and Geney would never steal from people. But BJ was not hearing it. Again, BJ demands they take off their clothes, and really, what other option do they really have? So they take off their clothes. A minute later, oh my gosh, sorry, that was my stomach. A minute later, while they're standing there with no clothes on, BJ asks them if they want to die. And so as Erika explained it, when BJ pointed her gun at Joshua and Geney and began barking out orders, she knew right then and there that he was going to kill them. She said that it was something he had been talking about for quite some time. After BJ asks Geney and Joshua if they want to die, Geney grabs Erika by both of her arms and starts shaking her, saying, "We did not take your stuff." She was begging Erika to believe her, telling Erika that she and Joshua have been really good to them all night long, and she reminds Erika that they were the ones that paid their bus fare. BJ starts laughing and then tells Joshua and Geney to get in the bathroom. As Joshua and Geney started to head towards the bathroom, BJ starts to run after them, but Joshua manages to grab Geney, and they get into the bathroom and they slam the door and lock themselves in. Now, according to Erika's version of what happened next, after Joshua and Geney locked themselves in the bathroom, BJ stood by the door, pointing the gun toward them. BJ was aiming his gun at eye level at the door, even though it was closed. Erika says she ran downstairs and started looking for the missing stuff in hopes that she would find it somewhere so that BJ could stop doing what he was doing. She said that while she was looking, she heard several loud cracks that she knew had come from her gun. And then she heard BJ trying to kick the bathroom door open. But as she was downstairs hearing those noises, knowing BJ had begun killing, she ran back upstairs quickly. She said that BJ then stormed into the bathroom and went straight for Joshua, who had already been shot in the arm and was holding a towel on the wound. Erika claims that she was pacing in the bedroom, not wanting to look. Then BJ pointed the gun at Joshua's head and said, "Now are you gonna tell me where our shit is?" Joshua wouldn't answer at first. He was obviously in a lot of pain. And Geney was terrified. She was screaming, crying, and shaking. Then Joshua says to BJ, "Look, dude, I was in the army, you're in the Navy, why are you doing this to us?" But BJ got right up in Joshua's face at this point and said to him, "See you later, motherfucker," then shot Joshua in the head, which dropped him to the floor. Erika claims she was still in the bedroom when she heard the shot and Joshua hit the ground. However, Joshua does not die immediately, and BJ calls Erika into the bathroom, and she sees blood coming out of Joshua's mouth. Erika claims it's at this point she wets herself from being so terrified. BJ comes out of the bathroom and is laughing at Erika because she just wet herself. With Joshua on the ground, Geney tried to use Joshua's body as a shield while she's crouching under the countertop crying and naked. Erika then said that BJ, standing at point blank range, shot at Geney, but he missed and the bullet lodged itself in the tile. Now, remember, Joshua was qualified as an expert marksman with a higher ranking in the military for shooting than most anyone else in his unit, so it's kind of hard to believe that he missed, but this is what Erika says. So pissed off that he missed, BJ held the gun up to Geney's left shoulder and shot down at her through her lung. Erika said at that point there was blood everywhere. So where Geney was curled up under the countertop, there was a pool of blood underneath her body. BJ had shot the both of them. With both Joshua and Geney now dead, BJ walked out of the bathroom and told Erika to go out to the beach to see if Geney and Joshua had thrown their stuff over the balcony. He also wanted Erika to check if there were any cops outside because of the gunshots. BJ explains to Erika that it was possible that Geney and Joshua had tossed their stuff over the balcony in hopes of grabbing it on their way home. He wanted Erika to look for the police because, number one, he was afraid that people heard the gunshots. Number two, he was afraid because Erika earlier had called 911. But Erika did not want to do it. She told BJ that she cannot be away from him, but he demanded she go outside and take a look around. He told her to grab their walkie-talkies, which they had these walkie-talkies to communicate when they were robbing stores. He tells her to grab one of them out of the Jeep and bring it up to him while he sits and watches the bodies. So Erika goes, she grabs the walkie-talkies, she takes a quick look around the beach, but does not find anything. Erika and BJ are now hyper-focused on finding Erika's missing stuff, so with the bodies in the bathroom, they looked all over the place. And then they find her missing purse underneath the bed in the master bedroom. So all their stuff, the large Hooters bag with the gun, jewelry, pills, her wallet, their cash, and everything else, was underneath the bed upstairs in the master bedroom. As Erika and BJ stood there, just staring at their stuff, BJ made the comment that the bodies are going to start to smell and they need to get rid of them. BJ tells Erika to go grab some garbage bags, but they didn't have any of the heavy-duty bags they needed. So Erika went to an all-night convenience store and bought some. By the time she came back to the condo, BJ was standing there in front of Erika, completely naked. He had painted himself with Geney and Joshua's blood. He was holding Joshua's head out to one side in one hand, and Geney's head out to his other side in his other hand. And while standing there, he has a full-on erection. The rest of Geney and Joshua were inside the hot tub, and their heads were BJ's trophies. The knives that BJ had used to decapitate them were gifts that he and Erika had bought for one another as Valentine's Day gifts. He asks Erika if they have a digital camera because he wants to send pictures to his buddies. Erika runs downstairs, and while she's down there, BJ had cut off the arms and legs from the bodies. He had placed them in the garbage bags that Erika had bought earlier. Joshua's torso, however, was up on the edge of the hot tub, and BJ needed help lifting it into a bag, but Erika refused. When he was done putting Joshua's torso into one of the big black bags, he walked over to one of the other bags with the legs inside. He opens it and cracks the leg in half with his foot as if it were a piece of wood, and he asks Erika if they can have it for dinner. Erika claimed that BJ was fixated on cooking the leg and that he had always talked about eating human flesh. She said it was a turn-on for him to even talk about it. After Erika talks BJ out of cooking one of the legs, BJ tells Erika to go downstairs and get the kit bags. Joshua's torso would not fit into one of the garbage bags the way BJ had wanted it, and kit bags were BJ's old seal canvas bags that are much bigger and a lot stronger than plastic trash bags. The kit bags, about 5 or 6 feet long, would be better. There were organs just floating in a pool of blood inside the hot tub, body parts flesh and bone on the floor. After BJ packaged the body parts in bags, he said they were going to have to dispose of the bags in dumpsters somewhere. By now, it's 6 o'clock in the morning and the sun is up. They have all these bags with body parts and they need to get rid of them. So they want to put them into the Jeep and they want to drive somewhere to dispose of them. BJ had plastic storage tubs that he had put all the bags into. This way they could get them downstairs without leaking blood on the concrete or inside the Jeep. BJ takes a shower and he and Erika then leave to dump the bodies. Erika passes out in the Jeep on the way to the first dump site. She had snorted so much Xanax throughout the night and into the morning that it knocked her out. She and BJ had been up by this point for 24 hours. They were driving to the next major beach town called Rehoboth Beach. And that's because in Rehoboth, it was more private, I guess I would say. And there are lots of grocers and large department stores, which means that there are lots of dumpsters. When Erika opens her eyes, the Jeep is parked and BJ is not in the vehicle by her side. BJ is outside the Jeep putting everything in 2 different dumpsters. After BJ is finished, he jumps back into the Jeep and he tells Erika that they're going to go shopping there the next day because he wants to make sure the dumpsters were emptied. But he also thought that a good shopping trip at the outlets was something that Erika could probably use at this point. BJ had split up the bags and placed them into 2 different dumpsters about 40 yards apart from each other. He even jumps inside the dumpsters and sprinkles sloppy Joe mix and other rotting foods over the bags so that no one got curious and opened them. Because he had worked at a grocer's when he was in high school, BJ knew that the large chain grocers empty their dumpsters 2 or 3 times a week. He knew that the particular Food Lion in Delaware that he had chosen would be on the same schedule. He also knew that because rotten meat and other foods had been tossed out with regular garbage fairly regularly, the smell of the decomposing body parts would not cause anyone much concern. When BJ and Erika get back to their condo after dumping the body parts, BJ takes a nap while Erika starts to clean, which is something she does whenever she gets anxiety. She started to rearrange and fix things downstairs in the condo, and when she was finished, she wakes up BJ and tells him that they need to get all the blood out of there, that it was starting to smell and making her sick. So BJ smokes some of the marijuana that he claimed Joshua had brought over, and then he goes upstairs and starts to try to get the bathroom to look normal again. Upstairs, BJ takes a gallon of bleach and he pours it all over the blood on the floor, and then he gets down and starts to scrub the floor. He asks Erika to help him, but she tells him that the body parts and guts were something she wasn't touching, so BJ does it himself, while Erika goes to the balcony to work on her tan. I don't know if I've mentioned this already, but Erika had this fierce addiction to tanning. she went every day, sometimes twice a day. And you can tell by looking at her pictures that, yeah, she looks like an Oompa Loompa sometimes. So, Erika, as I said, she went to the tanning salon every day back home. Now, after a few hours, BJ was able to get the bathroom to where it looked like maybe somebody could have just had a bloody nose. The next day, BJ and Erika go to Home Depot and they buy paint and they buy a new bathroom door and other supplies that they were going to need to get the bathroom back to normal as it was going to get. Any garbage they accumulated, such as bloody rags, paper towels, body organs, tissues, and, as Erika called it, guts, were thrown into trash bags or put directly down the garbage chute in the condo's main hall. Throughout all this, Erika takes photos documenting the entire bathroom remodeling job. In fact, Erika had documented everything on film, even after the murders. She documents the trip to Home Depot, everywhere they had stopped to eat or drink, and just about everything else they did together. And almost all the photos taken of BJ and Erika together, which were taken by somebody just walking by or a stranger they met up with and befriended during this period before and after the murders. BJ and Erika in these photos are smiling, hugging, and kissing. There are even photos of Erika eating chicken wings and drinking beers and playing miniature golf and getting a tattoo of a cobra on her hip, which is something I'm going to talk about the significance of that tattoo later. There's one photograph of Erika and BJ each with a pile of crab legs in front of them, and this photo was taken about 20 hours after the murders. And while they were running around Ocean City, drinking, doing their drugs, and eating all-you-can-eat crabs and pitchers of beer, Erika was wearing Joshua's ring with a tiny little blood spot on the inside arc of it on a chain around her neck. And Geney and Joshua's IDs were in her purse. Now, I'm going to talk about an incident that happened while they were on this 2-week vacation. I believe it was just 2 days after they murdered Geney and Joshua. So in the middle of their vacation, BJ and Erika meet up with a new friend. His name was Justin Todd Wright. BJ and Erika had gone back to Secrets in the afternoon, and they stayed there most of the night. Justin seemed pretty drunk, but he was fun. So here they meet this Justin, and Erika was acting crazy. I mean, completely wrecked. And Justin, well, he wasn't doing too well himself. He was pretty drunk and acting kind of like a fool. So remember, they had just met this person. At some point that night, before midnight, one of the bouncers from Secrets approaches BJ and Erika and asks them to leave. And that's because Erika is out of control. She was stumbling all over the place, slurring her words and laughing at people, just being a consummate idiot. There was one point on the bar. And Erika thought that would be a memory to be proud of for their future children, and she documents that mess for her scrapbook. This was a scrapbook that she was making to document the whole Ocean City trip. So, BJ and Erika had been at this bar for about 10 hours already, and Erika apparently wasn't entertained enough. She was likely losing her high, and so she started yelling and screaming and swearing at people and spitting at people. And BJ was kind of getting sick of it, and he tried to rein her in. But she gets upset with BJ, and she starts telling BJ that she's going to kill him. She was screaming this at BJ, that she's going to kill him. And the bouncer, who up until that point had been keeping his eye specifically on Erika, he was done with Erika's nonsense, and he begins to insist that she and BJ get their belongings and get out of the bar. As he did that, Erika takes her gun out of her purse, and she begins to wave it around, telling this bouncer that she's going to kill him. But that wasn't even the end to the shenanigans. The bouncer caught BJ picking the lock of an ATM inside the bar. And before the police could get there, BJ grabs Erika, and she's laughing and waving her gun around. And BJ, Erika, and their new friend Justin leave the club. Around midnight, Justin calls his good friend Melissa, but he doesn't call her just once or twice. He calls her 16 times. Justin was falling down drunk, and he wanted Melissa to meet him and his two new friends at another Ocean City bar. Melissa lived in Delaware, and she was leaving on holiday to Hawaii the very next day. She really did not want to go, but after being talked into it, Melissa agrees to go meet them. It would take her about 30 minutes to get there. Now, as she's driving there, Justin calls Melissa and tells her that he and his new friends were stuck on the side of the road because they got a flat tire, and they're all so wasted that nobody could change the tire. After asking Justin for some landmarks to help her be able to find them on the side of the road, Melissa finds them and gets on the ground and changes the tire herself. When Melissa was done changing the tire, BJ and Erika thank her, and they ask her if they could buy her a drink for helping them out. But something that Melissa noticed and thought was really strange was how BJ and Erika seemed so out of it one moment and okay the next. Not quite sober, but coherent enough to communicate. So Melissa didn't really understand how it was that they could not figure out how to change a flat tire. She really did not want to be out after all this, and she politely tells BJ that she's going to take Justin with her and head out. So essentially, Melissa takes a pass on this drink, but Justin doesn't want to leave quite yet, and he convinces Melissa to just go out for one drink with them, and she agrees. So they all head to a bar called Fishtails. Once there, Erika takes out her camera and she starts taking pictures of everybody. At one point, Melissa notices that BJ has a bloody lip. He has blood stains on his lower teeth, and he also has some swelling near his chin. Of course, Melissa's curious as to what happened, and when she asked BJ about it, he said that he hit his mouth on the steering wheel when they got that flat tire. After being at Fishtails for quite a while, Melissa wants to leave. She tells BJ and Erika that they're really in no condition to drive and they should call a taxi. But Erika keeps begging Melissa to follow them back to their condo just to make sure they make it back safely. And Melissa agrees. She agrees because she has a feeling that no matter how wrecked Erika and BJ are, that they were going to get behind the wheel and drive no matter what. So Melissa felt a sense of responsibility to make sure they made it back safely and to be able to make sure that they did not hurt any other people on the road. And so they leave, BJ and Erika in their Jeep, and Justin and Melissa in her car, with Melissa keeping her distance as BJ is swerving in and out of lanes, riding the brake and bouncing the Jeep all over the road. When they pull into the parking lot of BJ and Erika's condo about 8 minutes after leaving Fishtails, BJ runs up to Melissa's driver's side window and tells her that he needs her help getting Erika upstairs because Erika is passed out. So the three of them, BJ, Justin, and Melissa, walk over to BJ's Jeep, and they open the door and grab Erika, who at this point appeared to be unconscious. BJ tries picking her up, but she slips from his grip and she hits her head on the Jeep door. Now Melissa was pretty mad at this point because she thinks that BJ is being very careless with his wife, and she tells BJ, like, look, that's your wife, be more careful. Now when they get to the door of the condo, which is on the top floor, Erika suddenly comes out of her drunken stupor and she starts going through her purse looking for her keys. This as if she had been alert the entire night. She finds her keys and she grabs them out of her purse and she opens the door on the first try with no problem. It was strange how she had just snapped to attention, quite a bit different from just moments ago when she was dead weight and appeared unconscious. As they walked into the penthouse, Erika places her purse on the table and she goes straight for the laundry room, where she noticed that the washing machine was not working. Before they had left, she had put a load of laundry in there, and she finds the clothes are still soaking wet. Little did Erika know that Geney and Joshua's hair had clogged up the washer that came from some of the clothes they had tried washing that had been lying on the bathroom floor at the time BJ cut up their bodies. Once inside the condo, Erika takes Melissa by the arm and she leads her into the living room. And Melissa, just like Geney when she first saw the place, was surprised at how nice the room was. She wanted to see more of it and she asked Erika if she wouldn't mind giving her a tour. Erika, always the perfect host, was very agreeable, and she even seemed to have snapped out of her stupor. She starts to tell Melissa that her father had constructed the building and he made the penthouse just for her. So at this point, I feel like Melissa kind of forgot about what her instincts were telling her at this point. She think, let her guard down a bit because she was focused on being in this beautiful place. And I think sometimes people can kind of think, like, how could anything bad happen in such a place? So at some point, Melissa reveals to Erika that she owns her own clothing business. And of course, Erika gets super excited at this because of course she collects things. So hearing that, Erika wants to show Melissa some of her own clothes. So as they are off doing that, BJ and Justin are sitting at the kitchen table drinking. Erika comes out of another room with all these different clothes and bathing suits that she owns. And she and Melissa walk into another room and they start going through the clothes and they just start talking about their favorite brand and favorite pieces of jewelry. It was the first time that night that Melissa feels a connection with Erika. She felt that they had some things in common, and Melissa was seeing Erika as somebody more than just some wasted space cadet that she had to rescue earlier in the night. As they were talking about jewelry, Erika wants Melissa to see a ring that her grandmother had given her. This ring was in Erika's purse. But when she went to get it, she could not find her purse. And Melissa swears that Erika had put it on the table when they walked in. Erika quickly begins to unravel. She keeps repeating over and over that they really need to find her purse. There were other items besides the ring that was inside the purse that Erika was worried about, like Joshua and Geney's IDs to begin with. Every second that went by, Erika got more animated and more, I guess I would say, disheveled. Melissa remembers Erika telling BJ, "We need to find my purse. Those people, their IDs are in my purse." Now Melissa had no idea what that meant, yet she could tell that the phrase had some sort of dark, important meaning to Erika and BJ that they both understood just by the mention of it. So they began looking around the main floor of the condo. They're turning over pillows from the couch and cushions. They look underneath at the kitchen table. They look in the kitchen, wherever they had been after they walked into the condo. After looking through the main floor and still not finding it, Melissa and Erika go upstairs and they start to look around up there. When Melissa gets to the bathroom where the hot tub is located, she notices that the bathroom door had been taken off its hinges and placed next to the door frame. But she also notices that there's a bullet hole in the door. BJ then comes upstairs and he suggests that somebody go down and look in the Jeep. But Melissa knew that Erika's purse was not in the Jeep because Erika was the one who had opened the door. The keys were in her purse. But nevertheless, Melissa and Erika go downstairs and they start to dig through the Jeep. By now, Erika is frantic. She's hysterical and manic. She seems like she's possessed. She's running around, mumbling things to herself, stressing to Melissa that there's nothing more important than finding that purse. After not finding it in the Jeep, Melissa and Erika rush back upstairs. And when Melissa walks in, she notices that BJ has a gun tucked into his pants that she had not noticed before. BJ walks up to Melissa with his two hands, grabs her by her face, and tells her how important it is that they find the purse. Now, this made Melissa feel as if he was accusing either her or Justin of stealing it, and she reminds BJ that she was the one who helped them that night, and she tells him that she has her own money and that she would never steal. But BJ acts like he does not even hear her, and he reminds her once again how important it is they find the purse. After a while, they are all upstairs near the bathroom. BJ was getting madder by the minute. He was stomping around and mumbling things to himself, making sure Melissa and Justin were well aware of the fact that he had a gun. At one point, Erika stood there not saying anything. She and BJ and Geney and Joshua were in this same situation not even 5 nights prior, and she knew how that night had ended, yet she just stands there not saying a word as BJ gets himself into this mindset that she knew would ultimately lead down one road. BJ is stomping around, doing his best to intimidate Melissa and Justin, and he says to them, "If you're ripping us off, we've had other people try to rip us off. If you've ripped us off as the other people who are here, I will do the same damn thing to you that I did to them. These people were bad people. I'm ridding the earth of bad people. They came into my place and ripped me off. No more will they do that." Now, after BJ says this, he's staring at the bullet hole in the bathroom door as they're all standing there. A while later, after they looked everywhere, Melissa was in the front bedroom looking for the purse when she hears BJ saying very nonchalantly, "Oh, look what I found." Melissa walks out of the bedroom and she notices that BJ had pushed a cushion from the couch forward and pulled the purse out. The purse had been in the couch the entire time, and even though Melissa was relieved, she thought that this all made no sense because she had looked in that same area of the couch several times and the purse was not there. So now she's getting creeped out. Not too long after that, Melissa and Justin leave, and the following morning, Melissa gets on an airplane to Hawaii. It was 10 days later when she came back home that she learned what Erika and BJ might have done to her and Justin had they not found that purse. So it's believed that the only reason BJ and Erika did not kill Justin and Melissa was because BJ and Erika only had 2 days before another party was checking into the condo that they were staying in. So that would give them very little time to clean up. So then on Thursday morning, BJ went to work on painting the new bathroom door that he previously bought at Home Depot. A new couple, as I said, was set to check in just 2 days. Erika went outside to work on her tan while BJ painted, and after he was done painting, he asked Erika what she wanted to do with the rest of the day, and she wanted him to take her tanning because she had paid for a week of tanning at a salon and she did not want to waste it. But BJ had just smoked and he had the munchies, and he wanted to go eat some wings at Hooters. So Erika went tanning while BJ went to Hooters and ate a plate of wings and drank a pitcher of beer. Once Erika was finished tanning, she meets BJ at Hooters, and once there, BJ looks pale and sick. A minute later, BJ starts vomiting, so Erika pays the bill and they leave. Back at the condo, BJ sleeps off his high on the couch while Erika mails out a few emails and takes care of some business on eBay. Remember, they sell their stolen merchandise on eBay. Now when BJ wakes up, he and Erika go to a place called the Green Turtle, which is a little local place that sells crabs and all these different kinds of beer. As they're walking in, they see at the front door a missing persons flyer asking for help in locating Geney and Joshua. In their surveillance videotape that police later viewed, they could not believe it when Erika stops, smiles, and just goes right on into the restaurant. Erika and BJ end up staying at the Green Turtle for most of the night, listening to the DJ, drinking, and, of course, snorting Xanax in the bathroom. After leaving the Green Turtle, they decided to go to Hooters, to their merchandise store. They wanted to rob it before they went back to the condo. Once there, BJ backs up the Jeep to the Hooters gift shop, which is directly next door to the restaurant. BJ has a green bag in his hand, which he gives to Erika, and he tells her that he had already picked the lock and had shut off the alarm. But what they don't know was that the Ocean City Police Department does routine patrols throughout the city all night long. Also, there was a silent alarm that BJ had tripped. So they both went into the gift shop and they start robbing the place. They took cigarettes, t-shirts, mugs, just about anything and everything they could get their hands on. Erika was making trips back to the Jeep as BJ walked around the inside of the shop, pulling things out that he wanted her to take. They were both armed. BJ had his gun and his shoulder holster, and Erika had her .357 in the crook of her back, tucked inside her pants. Police officer Jason Hart. He was working his summer job as a seasonal police officer for the Ocean City Police Department. He was riding with another officer, Freddie Howard, that night. They get a call to check out a tripped alarm at Hooters. As officers came around the corner and pulled into the parking lot, they noticed there is a Jeep Cherokee backed into the parking space in front of the Hooters store. They see two people in the process of robbing the place. These two people were putting merchandise from the store into their vehicle. As the two cops pull closer to the Jeep, the woman who's sitting inside the Jeep in the passenger seat doesn't move, while the male, attempting to get into the Jeep at that moment, steps away from the door. Erika and BJ were caught in the act. The officers get out of their vehicle quickly, and they tell BJ not to move. And BJ stops, puts his hands up, and asks them if they could just put the stuff back. For some strange reason, BJ thought that he could talk his way out of it. Officer Howard immediately grabs BJ by the arms and handcuffs him. After that, he pats BJ down and he finds his semi-automatic handgun tucked into the front of his pants inside a holster. There was no second gun inside a vestment-type shoulder holster that he was wearing, but BJ placed 2 magazine clips fully loaded inside the holster. The gun, tucked into BJ's waist, was loaded. It had a clip in it, and there was a bullet in the chamber. The officers look inside the Jeep, and it's filled with all sorts of Hoarders merchandise and just dozens of packs of cigarettes and display racks that BJ and Erika had obviously stolen. BJ was told to have a seat on the ground in front of the store as the other officer goes around to the other side of the Jeep. As Officer Hart approaches Erika, he notices that she's leaning over to grab something inside the Jeep, so he tells her to exit the vehicle, show her hands, and get out of it. Erika gets out of the Jeep with her hands up, and she was quickly handcuffed and brought around to the back of the Jeep. As Officer Hart began to pat Erika down, he notices that she has what appears to be a buck knife, which I did not know what the hell a buck knife was, but apparently it is a type of knife that folds in half. And so that knife was clipped to the front left pocket of her pants. He also found a handgun tucked in the crack of her butt. Ew. Erika also asks if they could just put the stuff back and be let go, but she was instructed to sit down by a wall near the store, and the center console of the Jeep was a .45 caliber handgun, which was also fully loaded. Also underneath the gun was a lockpick, one of the tools that BJ never left home without. Beside the lockpick were 2 ski masks, flex cuffs, and a pair of gloves. At some point, while the officers were analyzing the scene and making sure that there weren't any other people involved, like accessories, Erika calls Officer Hart over, and she tells them that she needs something immediately. She tells them that she has been snorting Xanax all night long, and her movements are very herky-jerky, kind of moving around quite a bit, and she's crying, and she's completely out of it. She tells the officer that she has anxiety problems and that she has not taken her medication and she badly needs it. By this point, there were other officers arriving on scene, and one of them was called over to deal with Erika. So Erika tells this officer that she needs her Paxil and Xanax, which is located in her purse on the front seat of the Jeep. She tells them that she takes it twice a day and that she had missed her dose at 10 p.m. and says she's having a panic attack. So she tells him it's inside her purse in a brown leather pouch, and she needs a pink pill and a white pill. So as this officer is going through Erika's purse, he uncovers 4 spent .357 shells in 1 live round, which seemed really strange that they would have 4 spent shells hanging around in the Jeep. As the officer continues searching, he sees what he believes to be a change purse, like a small zipper bag. He opens it and he finds several IDs. The officer was immediately struck by the photographs of the two people on the driver's licenses that he finds. He had been working on the night the missing persons case had been filed for Joshua and Geney, and as he sat there inside Erika and BJ's Jeep, he remembered that he had filed some paperwork that night and happened to run into the flyer with Joshua and Geney's photograph. The officer continues looking, and he finds Joshua and Geney's social security cards inside Erika's purse, and he finds a Bally's Total Fitness Club ID with Joshua's photograph on it. The officer walks over to his vehicle. He speaks to his captain, telling him that he thought that he found some information on a couple they just arrested for robbery that might have something to do with the missing persons case that the Ocean City Police Department had been investigating the past few days. So the Criminal Investigation Division of the Ocean City Police Department was called in, and the scene was shut down, and detectives were on their way. Detectives Richard Morak and Scott Brunel, who already had been looking into the missing persons case of Geney and Joshua, were called in. They were told that they needed to get over to BJ and Erika's condo immediately to check it out. There was a fear that Geney and Joshua were being held and they may need medical attention. But before that, Detective Brunel read Erika her Miranda rights and asked her if she was willing to speak with them without a lawyer, and she said that she will. After she signs the form, Detective Brunel asks her where she and BJ had met Geney and Joshua, to which she tells him, "I have no idea who or what you're talking about." So Detective Brunel goes to his car, gets a copy of the missing persons flyer, and shows it to her. But Erika insists that she had never seen them before, and that BJ might have put those IDs in her purse, and if he did, it was because he found them. When asked about the bullet casings found, she said that BJ had shot her gun and gave her the casings to show her how the gun worked. But with all the evidence found inside the Jeep, it appeared to detectives that maybe Erika and BJ had taken Geney and Joshua hostage and were holding them at the condo against their will. And that's when Detective Brunel and another detective decided to head over to BJ and Erika's condo right away with a team to see what they could find. Finding those items of Geney's and Joshua's on Erika and BJ after their arrest gave the Ocean City Police Department the opportunity to use an exigent circumstance clause in the law to go right into BJ and Erika's condo without a search warrant. Now, if you're not familiar with what means an exigent circumstance, it just allows law enforcement under certain circumstances to enter a place without a search warrant, or if they have what is called a knock and announce warrant, they don't need to knock and wait for the owner's permission to enter. The Ocean City Police Department had found flex cuffs and ski masks in BJ and Erika's Jeep, so that was enough to cover them under the law. Early the following morning, Ocean City Police Department detectives with uniformed officers and emergency medical technicians busted into BJ and Erika's condo and conducted a quick search for any live people. After entering the condo, they cleared all the rooms and balcony and they find nobody. On the glass table in the kitchen downstairs were 2 spent rounds of ammunition sitting there. Both had what appeared to be flesh and blood on them. One of the projectiles was significantly more damaged than the other, and one of the spent bullets had what appeared to be blood on it, and it had an odor. There was human tissue on the bullet, too. It was as if someone had extracted it or even dug it out after firing it into a person's flesh. With that, probable cause had been established, and a judge signed a search warrant so that the forensic team could get into the room as well. Now, while BJ was in lockup, he does not say a word. BJ knows his rights, and he knows that not saying anything would be better for him down the road. Detective Burnell called the station, and he requested that BJ be brought into the interview room from his cell. He wanted to give BJ an opportunity at explaining his situation or possible involvement. So BJ was read his rights and told Detective Burnell that if he wanted to know anything, to go ask his wife. Then he refused to say anything further after saying that he wanted to speak to his lawyer. But Erika was a different story. After she threw a fit, kicking and screaming and saying that she could not be away from BJ, she finally sat down and told Detective Burnell that she wanted to cut a deal. She said that she will trade information about the missing couple if they agree to drop all robbery charges against her, which Detective Burnell was floored by because she was facing more than a robbery charge, but she seemed only to be worried about that. So, as these crime scene technicians, detectives, and officers began to go through BJ and Erika's condo, they knew that some sort of terrible crime had happened in the bathroom right away. To begin with, Geney and Joshua's room key to where they were staying was found on the table in the living room. Police began to rip apart the bathroom upstairs, where they found a lot of blood. But what was more shocking than all the blood they found was the fact that some of the blood was still tacky and wet. And with Erika, who documented every major event in her life, with the murder and cover-up being one of those events, detectives discovered dozens and dozens of pictures of BJ, Erika, Josh, and Geney. Also, technicians ripped out the vanity in the bathroom and found thick, dried blood between where the tile floor met the vanity. Another thing CSI noticed was that the door leading into the bathroom was just painted. Even more disturbing, when detectives took out one of the drain spouts in the bathroom sink, the water stopper itself from the bottom up to the top was drenched red with blood. There was also a piece of someone's scalp with black hairs still attached, stuck inside the drain, along with more fresh blood. After a careful examination of the grout, it was hard to find a place where blood hadn't stained it. On the side of the vanity were were spattered in smudges of blood, as though there had been some sort of struggle there. The mattress upstairs in one of the bedrooms had a large stain about the size of a garbage can lid on one end of it. Over in the corner of one room was a blue Playmate cooler. Inside were two of Erika's massive 3-inch thick 5 to 6 foot snakes. In the laundry room were new bottles of Drano, fresh cans of paint, stain sealer, rollers, sandpaper, paintbrushes, and tarps. Also, the clothes dryer lint catcher was filled with hair and tissue and what appeared to be coagulated blood. Inside a duffel bag downstairs was Erika's stash of Yellow Jacket speed pills that she had bought from the internet and stolen, as well as more Xanax. But it was all the blood that concerned the detectives most, and the fact that there was no sign of Geney or Joshua. There had been a struggle for life in the condo, of that detectives were certain, and it appeared that the only two to walk out of it alive were BJ and Erika.